I know, when I watched it, I was stunned. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Barbara Valentino. I'll be your moderator for a few minutes. And I'm very proud to introduce our defender, Heather Slater. And Ethan Oser. Ethan is the producer. Is the producer, DP, and editor. One of the editors, all right. I was corrected. And okay, so let's get going. It is on. It really is a disturbing film in many ways. And now especially. Hold on to that question. I'll answer because that's one of my questions. So, but before I begin with Q&A, this is a film from Spark Media. The director is Andrea Kalin. Andrea has been a longtime friend, and I'm very, very honored that she agreed to let us close Community Stories 26 with the Public Defender. So, on behalf of Andrea, thank you.
Thank you.
So, okay.
Where do you want to start?
I'm sorry?
Where would you like to start?
I'm going to start with Heather. Just first off, why did you become a public defender?
When I was a little girl, I listened to my parents, who were Linka, which means leftist, and grew up hearing about inequality in America and in the world. My first job out of college was at Children's Center in New York City. I went there to work having read Billie Holiday's book. She had been there. And worked with little kids who had been taken away from their parents because of abuse or neglect. My second job was in Philadelphia, working with the next iteration of children, teenage boys from 14 to 19, who were locked up for juvenile delinquency. And I worked for an organization called World Family and took American students overseas, went to live in Europe with them, came back with one of my students and went to California and went to Bel Air and Beverly Hills and said, "Oh my God." And I called my mother. Being around poor kids or working class kids did not radicalize me, but seeing that wealth radicalized me. And I came back and I went to Antioch Law School, which in itself was a school dedicated to democratizing law for all people. And everyone that I met, older law students, said, "You're going to be a public defender." And I said, "Fuck no, never. I'm going to work to try to do something on a broader scale." And they looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, she's going to be a public defender."
Okay, so you're a public defender. How did you decide to defend, and I'm going to editorialize a little bit, the January 6th rioters, insurrectionists, patriots, depending upon where you are?
When the way it works is the federal defender's office calls you on the phone and says, are you available today? And there are very few kinds of cases where I exercise my right to say, no, I'm not available. And I told him I don't want to represent anybody who injured a police officer. I mean, we all saw a hard rose crushed between those doors. I've met him many times now, and I just couldn't possibly represent any of those people. But I said, you know, I'll represent as many as you need me to represent, because it's a small office with a panel of about 40 other lawyers, and they had 1,600 people they needed lawyers for.
Okay, so then we move to the movie. How did Andrea, I don't know if Ethan, approach you? And why did you say yes?
For
No, Andrea approached you. Why did you say yes to being featured in this? There has to be a story. I saw his laugh and your look. There is his backstory.
She wanted to move to Bel Air.
I know Andrea. She actually married a guy who used to live 2 doors from me, and we've been friends for a long time. And it turned out before she married him, and I had forgotten, she dated my cousin in Israel. So it was a whole crazy world connection. Her husband Marty saw the article about me giving books to my clients in the Washington Post, and he said, hey, Andrea, look, it's Heather. And Andrea called me on the phone and said, would you come to the office? I came, we talked, and she asked, would I be willing to do a documentary? And she told me that Ethan and David would be like flies on the wall. I'd never know they were even there. And every morning that they called, I had to run upstairs and put a brassiere on. So that's how I approached it.
Great segue. Great segue. So, Ethan, how long did you watch Heather, spend time getting dressed so you could follow her?
That didn't happen until later in the filming process, once we had built trust. Let's see, the first time I met Heather was, I think, July or August 2021. So we were about 6-7 months after January 6th. Sherry started taking on cases. And the way that this kind of works in documentary, if anyone's ever made one, is that it's really important that you kind of engender this trust between the people that you're filming and yourself. So we go to Heather's house and, we're just filming, we're bringing the camera around so you get more used to it. I'm not sure you ever did, but you were a good sport about it. And I just remember Heather wanting to show us this rooftop garden that she has at her house. In order to get up there, you have to climb, how tall is that ladder, like 10 feet or so? A 15-foot ladder. Heather bounced straight up, no problems whatsoever. I'm lugging my camera, struggling. And it was just like this really nice moment where we just kind of, the moment that really jumps out is I remember Heather showing us all the flowers that she was growing, and she made a joke about how she had blue flowers and red flowers next to each other, and isn't that nice? And I remember seeing this bee that was like flying around, and you started petting the bee, and said like, oh, they're so friendly. Like, I've seen this footage like 1,000 times, so I'm not offended you don't remember. But that was the first time we met, and it was really, we hit the ground running from there. I think Jack was sentenced in October of that year. So we started, we were really filming and kind of going full tilt, kind of right out the gate. And we wrapped up February, March of 2024, a few months before the election.
So you wore many hats in
Yes.
this production. Producer, DP, bit of an editor. When you were out filming, because for the filmmakers in this audience, Did you have any idea where the story was going or how you were preparing for edit?
Something we knew we wanted to talk about was finding a way to bridge these divides. Because, and Heather and I were talking about this just before the screening, is that there's something really different about screening the film in sort of the greater DC area. And that's that if you lived here during the time, we all experienced this on a very different level than the rest of the country. I remember my parents live out in Rockville, and they were saying they could hear police sirens on January 6th going into DC. So taking that rage and being really angry about what was happening, we tried to find, there's only one way forward in this country, and that's together. I mean, it's the United States of America. So we were looking for a story and a way of telling the story that showed someone as incredible as Heather kind of really going above and beyond with connecting with people, whether it be professionally, personally, and that was really what we latched onto, was sort of finding these moments of the humanity that you see, and not seeing, the news presentation of January 6ers, but rather sort of the actual people who were there and what led them there and why they were there, in hopes of sort of showing that there is potential for healing.
So during the process, you're filming, then you have to wait for the court cases to resolve. Did you go into the edit room, or was there a lull in the timeline?
I think Jack, if I'm not mistaken, I think was the second person sentenced of all the January 6th cases.
He was sentenced pretty early.
Yeah, he was a very early one. Annie was also pretty early too. I think the real challenge wasn't really sort of waiting out the time that the courts had to play out. I think the challenge was more watching how the situation in our country was evolving during the filmmaking process. We finished the edit. When we started the film, I didn't think there was any real chance that Donald Trump would have a political future. Boy, was I wrong, and that's okay. Everyone's wrong every once in a while. So I think it was really, as we progressed in the edit, was kind of trying to balance this bridge building while also pointing out that there is a real threat that's still out there. And before the film had been released, was still just a threat, and now is our reality with who is the sitting president at the moment.
When we were chatting before, you said you had not seen the ending. What do you think of the ending?
I think it's necessary that they put the coda on because, number one, Annie no longer appears to have changed and learned, or else she experienced terrible medical issues and she lost custody of her son. So there were a lot of personal traumas that may have taken away her ability to have change. But the situation in the United States has changed, and the pardons with the stroke of a pen and the lack of respect for the police officers who suffered and died by this president, and then the fact that there are so many people who are embracing right-wing white nationalism, it changes the optimism that I felt at the end of the film. Annie met us, and the first time I met Annie was when the film was screened in Telluride. And she was a new girl. She never had a library card until she met me. I asked all my clients to get library cards. She started reading, and she was wildly excited about all her new ideas. And since the pardon, having lost contact with Jack, and then losing contact with Annie, and then losing contact with what's happening they needed to change the ending of the film to make it a warning. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of the way that things have really changed about the way that I see the story from before the election until after is before, and I think the message is still in there, that it is about bridge building and that, again, the only way forward is together. But I think since Donald Trump won the election in 2024 and sort of really thinking about what this all means is I think what we're seeing at the moment is a failure of accountability. I remember talking to Heather sort of early in the process and her saying that, talking about you like you're not here, I remember talking to you early in the process and you saying that they're prosecuting this like they would prosecute an organized crime case, which is you start at the bottom and work your way up to the top. And what's so frustrating is that we all saw in real time the top pushing down, and yet there was a complete failure to hold the top accountable. And in a lot of ways, I think a lot of the trouble we find ourselves in now between corruption or a willingness to cover up the Epstein files or, pick a situation is because we failed to hold specifically Donald Trump and broadly him and his acolytes accountable for what they did. And that's really how I view sort of the message of the film now with this updated ending is that we're sort of living through the consequences of a failure of justice.
I would like to have this film screened to high school students and middle school students and have the opportunity to talk to them afterwards. Because I feel right now too many people are feeling fear. And what we need to feel is community and strength that we have in our hands and in our feet the opportunity to stand up, to reach out, to speak out, and to keep on speaking. This is my country, this is your country, and we have a responsibility. And when I've met kids like these kids, and I want to ask them what they thought, they were, before the CODA, before Trump became president again, they were excited. They wanted to be law students. They wanted to be journalists. They wanted to move forward. And in light of what's happened to the Washington Post, to Paramount, to media, there is more and more and more need for independent documentary filmmaking.
Thank you for that. We're going to go to the audience because I know you must have questions. What I'm going to ask, please make your questions short, wait for the mic, and hold on. Oh, okay, John up there, and then I'm going to take 4 questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, but they have to be short, please.
It's a very short question. I'm curious, if the pardon hadn't been written by Donald Trump, what do you think your relationship with Jack and Annie would be?
I think Jack might have disappeared into the wilderness anyway, but I think Annie would have stayed intelligently evaluating information. Not all of my clients have fallen off. Some of my clients did not want pardons. I told them to take them anyway, but they've gone back to school, they've read books, they've had tattoos removed from their faces, and they've become stronger individuals because they learn how to think.
Right. I think right there.
Hi, thanks. great film, and thank you for the amazing work you do. I really admire the way you personally connect with everybody you defend. To me, the most jarring moment of the film, to tell you the truth, was when you went on that radio show and to watch all the comments and all the hate, and it seemed like nobody was listening to anything that was being said. And I was just wondering, you kind of dismissed it in the film, saying, oh, I don't care, but I do wonder if you would mind sharing just a little bit of how that felt, knowing how much you invest in connecting with your clients.
I really didn't care. If you look at Mondami's news conferences and you read the comments from around the world, there's a lot of imbeciles in the world who are very willing to express their opinions. I feel value when my clients or become my friends, and like Jack defending me was fine. But when I have these personal relationships that last 5-10 years, and they grow and they don't go back to jail, then I've done my work. And what I learned a long time ago, if you get a client who's been arrested, sometimes it's police misconduct, but a lot of times they don't have good judgment and they have personal mental health issues, family issues. So if they come to you with all of those problems, even if you can solve a discrete criminal issue, at the end, unless there's some intervention, they still are going to face all those problems. So our society doesn't care.
I think there was one in the back. And I'm sorry to be pointing.
Thanks so much for the film. It was fantastic. One question I have is around the theme of bridge building, and I'm curious in terms of audiences who might be fans of Annie, for example, now, or who might watch this with skepticism or kind of be on the right side of the conversation. Have you screened this in settings that might be more to the right, or that might be followers or listeners of the podcast which were featured in the film? Has there been any feedback or change in those audiences? Have you received any criticism, especially since the pardons? Because I feel like the environment and the conversation around January 6th has dramatically changed. So I'm interested in, has there been any kind of bridge building that you've experienced?
Well, thank you for your kind words about the film. It's been really difficult to get people on quote-unquote the other side to sit and watch the film. I have Trump voters in my life. I know a lot of Trump voters, and I don't know if they've watched the film or not, honestly. I think what we faced with January 6th, and again, going back to the lack of accountability for the top, is that everyone has been able to kind of construct their own reality of what January 6th was, and it makes it very easy for people who don't want to see the facts of what happened or hear the facts of what happened to just cover their ears and bury their head in the sand and, punch the hole in the ballot and move on to the next election cycle. I made a joke before we premiered the film that we didn't really know what the audience reaction would be, because there's a lot in here for anyone from any side to take issue with. And I joked that either we were going to get a standing ovation or chased out of town with torches and pitchforks. Fortunately, it was closer to the former than the latter. But we've gotten a lot of criticism from people who point out that, why is this the example of a failure of the criminal justice system when you have, well, I mean, you probably know the data better than I do, a third of African American men who have been incarcerated. You have recidivism rates that are, through the roof, and that we have a system that isn't helping anyone to prevent themselves from getting into prison, but rather just kind of sets them up to get sent back. And it's fair criticism. I think using January 6th as this way of talking about the failures of our justice system is in some ways a little off the message that we're used to talking about, but at the end of the day, the justice system needs to work the same for everybody, and what we were seeing was people like Jack and Annie being dragged through the mud on the internet and facing these insane criminal charges when, again, the people at the top face nothing. I mean, Donald Trump had a mugshot, I don't even think it was from this case, and it's featured on t-shirts now. You know, you go to Ocean City, Maryland, you can see them sold on the boardwalk. It's a bit of a departure from your question, but I guess what I'm saying is that it's been hard to get other people who are supportive of someone like Donald Trump to sit and watch the film. My hope is that this does become a piece of proof of what happened, and that, you know, when students in middle school and high school will hopefully watch the film in 50 years' time, this is an actual accounting of what happened and not potentially what's written in history books. Because the direction we're going right now, it really is on the line.
There was one question, who'd had their hand up that I pointed to? Down, okay. Yep. Oh, wait for the mic, please. Come on, you're getting the mic. Your mic runners for today. Are Maddie and Tommy. Clear them away.
Yes, thank you for the film. I was a journalist for a long time on Capitol Hill, and I was not on January 20th, January 2020, but I watched it on TV, and it broke my heart. You had 40 defendants that you represent. What was it about Annie, and what was it about the two that you picked that spoke to you, that you chose them rather than some of the others?
It is a good question, and I wish I could say that it was some divine inspiration as filmmakers that we happened upon these two people that took these different paths. But what it really came down to was it was hard to get people to want to be on camera. As you can probably imagine, a lot of people were, sure, there's your handful of folks who are really enthusiastic about their participation on January 6th, but I think a lot of people were embarrassed and wanted to move on, particularly among Heather's clients. There were some others that we tried to approach that we would have loved to have spent more time with, but respect to the fact that they just wanted to get on with their lives, and that, you know, they were being held accountable for the crimes that they had allegedly committed, and that's all they wanted to do with it. I think Jack and Annie were, I'm not sure, I think there's probably something to the fact that they were younger participants, that they were maybe more comfortable with sort of having an online presence and being in front of a camera. That's a complete guess though, because Heather represented, I mean, from ages 18 through 70s, I think. And yet Jack and Annie's happen to be, 5 years apart in terms of age. So it's really just a stroke of luck with the two people that we ended up filming with, but had we had the opportunity to branch out to include more people, I don't think we would have. Purely because what would have happened is the more faces you include, the more it dilutes how much you can actually dig into their stories and who they are, and then suddenly it starts to become, they're just one of 1,500 people who stormed the Capitol again. In our film, they're one of 4 people profiled, or one of 6 people profiled. So I think this allowed us to keep it into a very intimate, sort of interpersonal story.
There was one young girl who I talked to, Miss Krasinski. She was willing to be in the film. And her story was her mother brought her down. And when she went back home to Connecticut, she moved out of her mother's house. She went into counseling. She went back to college. And she's now a therapist and does not support her mother or Donald Trump. A lot of my clients, Ethan said, moved on with their lives, were embarrassed. A lot of my clients came from Indiana and Illinois. They all came almost universally from rural areas. They had no access to mainstream media. They got most of their information from Fox News. Those were the normal ones. And then there were a lot of people, an awful lot who had PTSD, historically diagnosed mental health issues, and members of, what's that crazy group? The Ross were in?
Which one?
I forget, but members of like real extreme,
Branch Davidians?
what?
They're from Texas, right? Like Branch Davidians?
No, they're not, they were not, no, I did have Branch Davidians, but the, QAnon, thank you. Members of QAnon, and hard to deal with them, and I did ask the judge, and I wanted to let me off case, and Judge Boasberg said, Heather, if you can't represent them, who will? And I said, I don't know, but I can't represent him. And I'm happy to say that I had good judgment, because he was just sentenced to 100 years. Andrew Johnson, he was horrible. He was a sovereign nations person. He would send me hard porn. And God is great. What goes around comes around. He was pardoned, and now he's paying the price. So.
Can we, I'm sorry, we're
Can
gonna,
you take that one gentleman and take
okay,
last one?
okay.
I have been a neighbor of Heather's for a long time. And I want to say that this film, as we went through it, I went, this is a portrait of the Heather that I've known for 40 years. This is who she is, and it was gratifying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Riley. How they viewed the film, and then we can finish.
So they're my kids, so I told them already that they should say something. If they want to.
If they want to.
Okay, sure. Can we, hold on, let's get them on camera. No?
Not on the microphone? No.
All right.
They're being shy, so.
Okay,
They,
sorry.
But I told them to say something.
they have
So they'll
freedom.
talk to you afterwards.
So, with that, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Ethan.
Thank you.
I want to thank Heather. Continue being the nudnik. Yeah. And a bit of a reflection. Someone reminded me. First of all, 2 other board members are in here. John and Jay, would you wave? I thank Lee for everything, the staff. You saw our sponsors, it's important. They support independent filmmakers and filmmaking organizations. And there was so much miscommunication. But I was reminded, in 2 days, it'll be 6 years since we closed, I personally closed the doc's office for COVID. And I remember that day vividly because I was on Apple Avenue, closed the door. And I really did cry because I didn't know if we would ever open again. And this weekend has been a testament of, we've had sold out crowds, and I thank the filmmakers especially, but I thank the audience. Please continue, we need your presence because you've put a smile on my face as CEO for this weekend, because 6 years ago, I wasn't smiling, so I thank you very, very much. And with that, we're a wrap for Community Stories 26. We'll see you next year. And thank you, Andrea.